Okay, thank you everyone for coming to our place scrutiny committee. Before we go into all the presentations, Ian, are there any declarations of interest?
Are there any from the floor from members, please?
I'll take that as a no. That's good. But if there are, just please put them in the chat and we'll deal with them as necessary. Thanks for that. Item 2 on our brief agenda is any urgent business?
None, Chairman.
There's nothing. I've not been notified. Ian, have you been notified of anything?
There's nothing, Chairman, no.
Lovely, thank you. And item 3, apologies for absence.
Councillor Evans and Councillor Hewitt as Executive Cabinet Member. If there are any others from the floor, please can you indicate? That's fine, thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. And excuse me, the main item for this evening, which we're all looking forward to, item 4, the Greater Manchester Clean Air Plan update. And I'd like to introduce a few people. We've got Simon Warburton, who's the Transport Strategy Director of Transport for Greater Manchester. Megan Black, who's the Head of Logistics and Environment for Transport for Greater Manchester. And Nigel Bellamy is the Technical Director, Air Quality Consultants Limited. So I'd like to thank them. So I think what we'd better do from a questions point of view, if it's okay with the presenters, I should have sorted this out earlier, completely forgot. We can either wait till the end of the presentation or to the end of each person's particular segment. So if we get that cleared up now, then members know when they need to, chip in, and I know when to interrupt things so I don't cause mass confusion. Right, thanks, Councillor Peel. Hopefully you can stay long enough. So unless anyone's got any objections, if we wait till the end, but as the presentation's going along, you can indicate that you want to speak in the chat. I'll make a note, and what I'll do, I'll like your comment so you know that I've seen it, and then we'll take it from there. So we can go ahead with the presentations now, please.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
We can.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so this is a presentation on Greater Manchester's Clean Air Plan and where we have got to so far. So if we can move to the next slide. The first thing is just to outline the fact that legal responsibility to act to reduce nitrogen dioxide concentrations has been delegated to local authorities, and that's as a result of legal action. The UK government has done that. The GM authorities are all directed to address roadside nitrogen dioxide compliance, and that needs to be done within the shortest possible time. So Greater Manchester authorities have been working together following government guidance and the process to work out how they were going to deal with the nitrogen dioxide concentrations on the local road network, and they have brought forward a clean air plan which has recently been out to consultation. Just to remind that the timescales for the Greater Manchester Clean Air Plan are determined by a ministerial direction, and that ministerial direction says that the Greater Manchester authorities need to implement a Category C clean air zone to deliver compliance with nitrogen dioxide standards in the shortest possible time and by 2024 at the latest. And so that means that a clean air zone in Greater Manchester needs to be launched in 2022. And so through all the consultation material that's been presented, we've talked about that being in spring of 2022. So if we move forward to the next slide. So the Greater Manchester Clean Air Plan is being put together, as I said, because it's been directed by the government, but also because air pollution also is linked to a range of serious health conditions and contributes to around 1,200 early deaths each year across the region. So the consultation asked for views on key elements of introducing a clean air zone across Greater Manchester, around the boundary, the daily charges, the discounts and exemptions, and the funding packages to support local businesses upgrade to cleaner vehicles. So at the time of the consultation, the government had already awarded Greater Manchester £41 million of funding, and Greater Manchester was seeking more than £100 million of further funding alongside £10 million of hardship funding to support those people that were considered most vulnerable to the financial impacts of the clean air zone. So there's a map on the slide that you've hopefully all seen before that shows where the predicted nitrogen dioxide concentrations were going to be in excess on the local road network. But clearly COVID-19 has come along and impacted Greater Manchester's clean air plan. So government instructed to continue with the plan as it was, to undertake that consultation, and then Greater Manchester has said it's going to assess the possible impacts of COVID-19 on the clean air plan. So as part of the consultation, ask questions about it, and this would help inform future decisions on each aspect of the final plan and provide a strong and clear evidence base for any changes to GM's funding asks and policy positions. And then this would be very clear to decision makers at the time of making the final plan. So next slide, please. So in terms of the report that's just gone through local governance, there were some headlines. So the consultation ended in December 2020, and so for the clean air plan there were just shy of 4,800 responses. And then at the same time as the clean air plan was undertaken, there was also a consultation done on minimum licensing standards, and as you can see there were just over 1,600 responses to that. So an assessment of the consultation responses and the impacts of COVID-19 on the clean air plan and the funding packages is now taking place. Decision makers will consider a final plan as soon as possible and by summer of this year at the latest. The headlines, and I'll go into a little bit more detail around this, say that the nearer term influence of COVID-19 on air quality isn't expected to lead to sufficiently long-term reductions in pollution, such that the modelled exceedances of nitrogen dioxide would be met without implementing a clean air zone. The report also talks about the proprietary work that's been undertaken to deliver a clean air zone within the timescales that we're being asked to deliver in. And so again, I'll go into a little bit more detail on that later on in the presentation. And then in terms of the headlines on the report, it also talked about minimum licensing standards also being analysed, and progress with that would also be reported at the same time as the clean air plan in the summer. So if we move on to the next slide. The clean air consultation ran for 8 weeks between the 8th of October and the 3rd of December. It adhered to the government's COVID-19 guidance that was in place around social distancing, and the purpose of the consultation was to seek views on residents, visitors, stakeholders and businesses on the proposals to achieve nitrogen dioxide compliance. The consultation wasn't seeking a decision on whether to introduce a scheme, because that's already been mandated by the Secretary of State. And I've said we had just short of 4,800 responses on the key elements of the clean air zone, so the boundary, the daily charges, and the proposals in terms of funding that would be offered to support people upgrade to compliant vehicles. But really importantly, the consultation also sought feedback on how COVID-19 has affected businesses and organisations in Greater Manchester, so that we could understand that in terms of bringing forward a final plan. Next slide, please. So in terms of COVID-19 and the impact on the plan is required to take action on nitrogen dioxide over a number of years into the future in order to demonstrate compliance with legal limits. So the plan for Greater Manchester not only has to show that we have complied with nitrogen dioxide limits, but that we will actually maintain that compliance over time. So the nearer term influence of COVID is that air quality improvements aren't expected to lead to sufficiently long-term reductions in pollution. So that means that the modelled exceedances of nitrogen dioxide won't be met without implementing a clean air zone. So whilst COVID-19 has radically altered transport patterns and behaviours, the relaxation of lockdown level 1 travel restrictions since June has seen more vehicles on the road. And by the time we got to lockdown 2 in November 2020, traffic flows were at around 85% of typical pre-COVID-19 levels. So there are many ways in which COVID-19 would affect air quality. Some would improve air quality because people would be working at home, but some would worsen it in terms of vehicles not being upgraded to the level that we expected. Recently, the government has sent out guidance to all local authorities who are making clean air plans. And what they have said is that when assessing the impact of COVID-19 on our projected nitrogen dioxide levels, given the fact there's considerable uncertainty of what COVID-19 will do, we must accept that there is a risk of putting in place clean air measures that overachieve. So the government is already setting out the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty in how things are modelled, but if we put in place things that overachieve, they're almost saying we must accept that as we move forward with the modelling that we have to do to show how our final clean air plan is going to achieve compliance over a number of years. So if we move on to the next slide. So in terms of the consultation responses, there's work ongoing at the moment to analyse all the information that's come through, and that information is going to inform the GM Clean Air Plan. It'll also inform the minimum licensing standards consultation to help local authority decision makers make fully informed decisions on the final plan. There's also work undergoing in terms of understanding the economic impact of COVID-19 on traders and businesses. And so a final clean air plan that brings all of that information will be brought forward as soon as we can, as I say, in the summer of this year, to set out the consultation results, to set out the impact of COVID-19 and to make a final recommendation in terms of the package of measures that Greater Manchester needs to implement to ensure achievement of nitrogen dioxide compliance. So if we move on to the next slide. One of the things that we'd been have done in the report is to update on funds. So in terms of the Clean Bus Fund, government awarded just over £14 million as an initial tranche of money to help fund retrofit of buses to services that run in Greater Manchester and that have got older engines which aren't compliant but can be upgraded to meet clean air zone emission standards. The distribution of that funded started in December, and I will give an update as to where we are with that, and it's available to vehicles that operate on registered bus services within Greater Manchester. In terms of Hackney carriages and LGVs or vans, the government accepted there was a need for vehicle replacement funds and asked for more information, which has been submitted to the government. So if we move on to the next slide, one of the things that your officers asked us to do as part of this presentation was just update in terms of what the funding offers were for the clean commercial vehicles. So this is the position at consultation. So remember, there's the consultation responses that we need to go through, and there's also the impacts of COVID as well that we need to look at as to what that actually means. But at consultation, we set out that for light goods vehicles, we were looking at about £3,500 per vehicle for replacement. For minibuses, we were saying £5,000, and for HGVs, we were saying up to £5,500 for replacement or £16,000 for retrofit. And then for coaches, we're also saying up to £16,000 per vehicle for either retrofit or replacement. Throughout the consultation, we did set out that we anticipated that the funding, we were proposing that the funding was made available to small and micro businesses, sole traders, charities, social enterprises, private owners, targeting initially those individuals or smallest businesses with the oldest vehicles, because those would be the most polluting. So all of those consultation positions have been set out. We've got the responses and we're just working through them, what that means now in terms of a final plan. So if we move on to the next slide. Your officers also asked that we set out what that meant in terms of the Clean Taxi Fund. So again, for taxis, we were setting out that it would be for Hackney carriage and private hire owners that were licensed with one of the 10 Greater Manchester authorities that would be able to apply for funding. It would be limited to the number of vehicles that could be funded per applicant to 8 for Hackney cabs and 10 for private hire vehicles. And for Hackney cabs, we were setting out an offer of £10,000 per vehicle. That was either a running cost grant or a contribution to vehicle finance, because through all of this, we're offering both grant amounts, but also opportunity for people to use our funding to go through a vehicle finance panel to help them upgrade their vehicle if they needed help in that way. For replacement with a zero emission capable wheelchair accessible Hackney cab, or we're also offering £5,000 if somebody wanted to use the money to upgrade to a LPG retrofit. And then for private hire vehicles, you can see there are a number of funding offers that were set out for different types of replacement, whether people were choosing to replace with a compliant petrol or diesel vehicle, whether there was perhaps a little bit more money on offer if they're wanting to replace with a compliant hybrid or plug-in hybrid, more money on offer to help with running costs if they wanted to replace with a zero emission capable vehicle, and again more money if they were needing to replace with a compliant minibus or wheelchair accessible vehicle. So there is money available as well from the government in terms of upgrade to zero emission capable vehicles. There are government grants available through the Office of Zero Emission Vehicles. If we move on to the next slide. I did just say that I would let you know where the Clean Bus Fund had got to in terms of retrofit. So as you can see, the funds opened in December of last year, and so far we've had 44 applications that have been made that equates to the bus operators seeking funding for 801 vehicles to help them upgrade to retrofit their vehicles. So really good progress being made in that, and we're just working through the different grant agreements now to sign them off with the operators and get the funding out to them so they can get the vehicle upgrades done. And just to say that those figures were as of March of 17th of this year. So if we move on to the next slide, I did mention that proprietary arrangements are being made for the Clean Air Zone. So the government provided an initial tranche of £36 million of funding to take this forward. So Transport for Greater Manchester, on behalf of the 10 Greater Manchester authorities, have been undertaking the procurement exercises to deliver the different elements of work that are needed to do this, and formal contract awards are expected to be made through 2021. So there's procurement around the signage that would be required for a Clean Air Zone. There is the actual service that would deliver the Clean Air Zone, so that's the vehicle detection and processing, handling queries from members of the public if they have been detected, integration with the central government payment portal that is handling Clean Air Zones across the country, and then also a service that would need to deal with the penalty enforcement services if people chose not to pay any fixed penalty notice that had been issued to them. There'll also be contracts put in place around debt recovery, around Clean Vehicle Funds service. So this is the administration of the funds as people apply to get the money to help them upgrade to a cleaner vehicle. And then there's also a contract that needs to be put in place to make sure that we undertake the necessary air quality monitoring, because that is the information that we would be able to supply to say that Greater Manchester had successfully achieved compliance with nitrogen dioxide, had managed to do that, we're saying, for 2 years, and then would be able to decommission the Clean Air Zone once we'd notified the Secretary of State of achieving compliance across the region. So if we move on to the next slide. As well as the proprietary arrangements, there's also governance that's required for the Clean Air Plan. So what we have set out through the report that's being considered is that there are several functions that can only be discharged by the charging authorities. So that's the individual 10 authorities. And as the combined authority isn't a charging authority, there are some a couple of clean air committees that need to be joint committees that need to be put in place. So there are 2 joint committees that have been set up now. The first one of those is the Clean Air Charging Authorities Committee. So this is a joint committee of the charging authorities to enable any decisions that are just needed to be taken jointly by the 10 authorities together acting in relation to the clean air zone. This committee won't meet until after the authorities have considered the final plan. And then there is an Air Quality Administration Committee. So this is a joint committee of the charging authorities and the Greater Manchester Combined Authority to enable joint discharge of the functions and to ensure that Transport for Greater Manchester can be directed by GMCA to undertake various activities. And just by way of update, that committee met for the first time today. So those formal arrangements have all been put in place before the contracts can be awarded, which is what we needed to do and the report sought to set up. If we move on to the next slide. One of the things, again, that your officers asked us to do in a little bit more detail maybe than we've gone into in the report that you considered was to set out where other cities were in terms of their clean air plans. So as you can see there, as we start at the top, you've got Bath and North East Somerset, their clean air zone, a city centre category C, launched last Monday. You've got Birmingham, who are due to launch their clean air zone category D on the 1st of June. You've then got Bristol approving a full business case for their clean air zone in February, and they are saying that they would implement something in 2021. Leeds is slightly different, and I've got a whole slide on that next to talk about, because Leeds were proposing to put in place a clean air zone, but there was some work that's gone on with the Joint Air Quality Unit to look at that. But as I say, I'll come on to that on the next slide. We've got Bradford, who are proceeding with a clean air zone in their city centre category C, which is launching in January of next year. You've got Sheffield, who are still deciding on the final clean air plan. A bit like us, they're determining the impact of COVID-19, but they are continuing to work to develop their final plans and agree when it will be delivered. You've got Liverpool, who are also launching a public consultation on the creation of a clean air zone. And you've also got Portsmouth as well, who are going to be proceeding with a category B clean air zone, which must be live before the end of 2021. So lots of other cities also taking action around nitrogen dioxide limit values. If we move on to Leeds, because obviously it is something that's attracted a lot of attention. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So Leeds, back in March 2019, Leeds made a decision to implement their clean air zone, and they anticipated activating their charging scheme in January of 2020, so last year, but that was delayed because of the technology rollout issues that they had and then the onset of the pandemic. The important point to note here that their vehicle change funds had been available since March of 2019. So with the Joint Air Quality Unit, so that's the government's unit that are charged with implementing or helping authorities implement clean air zones across the country, they reviewed the impact of COVID-19 to understand whether a clean air zone remained necessary for Leeds, or whether nitrogen dioxide compliance could be achieved in the same time frame and maintained in other ways. So the government needed to be confident that compliance was not just achieved, but reductions would also be sustained. So in October, there was an announcement that the joint review in Leeds conducted that Leeds had achieved its aims early and a clean air zone was no longer required. And the reason that they gave for that was that businesses had switched to cleaner vehicles faster than expected. Remember that back in 2019, they'd made the announcement that the clean air zone was going to be switched on in January of 2020. More than 90% of their buses and 80% of their heavy goods vehicles driven in their city centre scheme now use the cleaner Euro 6 engines. Nearly half of the city's licensed taxi and private hire cars were also hybrid or electric, and they also had some other transport infrastructure improvements that were increasing the popularity of ultra-low emission vehicles, and so we're accelerating improvements to the city's clean air quality. So because of that dramatic shift to their cleaner vehicles, the review found that air pollution in Leeds was below legal limits and wasn't likely to exceed them again, even if traffic were to return to normal levels or slightly higher. So basically, Leeds managed to achieve clean air and the aims of their clean air zone without actually needing to switch on their clean air zone, which is obviously something quite significant for them. So if we move forward to the final slide that I've got, in terms of next steps, for the Clean Air Plan, we are reviewing all the information that we gathered through the consultation. We need to fully consider that information and evidence gathered so that we can understand the consequences that COVID-19 has had on vehicle owners and trades affected by both the Clean Air Plan and minimum licensing standards. We're going to undertake the subsequent equalities impact assessment and the air quality and emissions impact assessments, because that work is vital to inform future decision on each aspect of the final plan. And then following the assessment of those findings, we'll develop a clean air plan, which, as I've said before, will go in front of the Greater Manchester authorities as soon as is reasonably practicable and no later than the summer of 2021. Clearly, there is a continuing dialogue with the Joint Air Quality Unit, which is the government's unit, to secure a clear response from the government on our outstanding clean air asks. And we're going to continue to undertake the proprietary implementation and contract arrangements that need to be in place to deliver a clean air zone and the other GM Clean Air Plan measures within the timescales that I've outlined earlier. So thank you, Chair. That's the end of the presentation. Clearly happy to take any questions that may have generated.
Just to mention, if you don't mind, Chair, there's some additional slides have just been sent from Nigel Bellamy, which have just been sent to John McMurray. Did you want those now, or did you want to take questions apart?
Yeah,
I think.
Sorry, go on, Megan.
So we have we've got those slides in the event of any questions that may be asked. So maybe, Chair, if we could take the questions, we may have preempted some of the questions, and we've got those slides prepared just in case.
Lovely, thank you very much. So there we go, question answered. So our first question is coming from Councillor Cunningham. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's been a very good presentation, that, very interesting. But if I was to sort of sum it all up, because there's been a lot to take in, I mean, we had a consultation where we got just short of 5,000 responses to the CAP and short of 2,000 to the MLS. But that's probably in Greater Manchester Combined Authority out of a total of something like just around the 3 million people mark. It seems infinitesimally small, and I wonder how the committee that's having to analyse these is going to attribute any meaningful results to it, because it is so small. And I wonder also whether or not there's a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut here. I know we don't have a choice on it. It has to be, we have to do this. But I think what does need to be borne in mind when decisions and measures are being decided to put forward for the final plan is that we don't, as the government has said, overdo this, because we're a little bit shooting in the dark. But many people, for instance, we're looking at 1,200 early deaths in Greater Manchester every year, but that doesn't mean that it's down purely to nitrogen oxide particles. A lot of those people, if you bring in the other factors, will have underlying health conditions. Many will drink, smoke, do drugs, get run over by a bus, possibly even on one of the new electric ones, because they don't hear them coming. You see, it's like there's a lot of things in here, and when you weigh it up, the cost of doing this is absolutely massive. And the one question, if I was probably going to have a question, would be, when we do all this and we bring hopefully the nitrogen oxide limits down to the required levels, with the amount of millions we've spent into this infrastructure, what happens then? Do we turn the ANPR cameras off, or are we creating a monster here that we obviously will employ so many? We've just heard so many people in staff to run the centres, to do the finance, chase the debtors. We'll have created an actual industry here with people on pensions and salaries that will still need jobs at the end of this when we make the limits. What happens then? Are we creating a monster we have to keep feeding them, and we have to find something else to charge motorists for in order to justify all the infrastructure and the jobs that we've put in place there. I do worry that's where we're going. You get mission creep when you start with something like this. I don't know what other people's thoughts of, or whether perhaps Megan, have these things already been raised elsewhere, and are there some answers out there that perhaps we're not aware of yet?
Right, so apologies, sorry, I just had an interruption here at home. So in terms of your questions with regard to numbers, well, as well as doing the consultation, asking people to give us their views and feedback through a form where we asked a number of questions, there was also some qualitative research done as well. I think the other thing I'd say is that when we held a public conversation about Greater Manchester's Clean Air Plan back in 2019, we got about 3,300 responses. So actually that is an improvement on things. All of the material that we present back to decision makers will clearly set out the number of people that made the responses through on that, so decision makers can understand the numbers that are involved. In terms of the ANPR cameras and your comments about generating an industry, we're very clear through all the consultation that we've done that Greater Manchester is trying to achieve compliance with nitrogen dioxide levels. And if we introduce the clean air zone as is proposed, as set out in the consultation, that should be achieved in 2024. And we've said that to show that we have achieved compliance, that we anticipate the clean air zone remaining live until 2026. And at that time, there would be decision makers would get a report that said that Greater Manchester had complied, and therefore to notify the Secretary of State that they were going to decommission the system. And all of those decommissioning costs are included as part of Greater Manchester's Clean Air Plan. So we've been very clear that is the proposal that is out there.
Thank you for that, Megan. I mean, looking at that would suggest to me that the next problem that's going to hit us if we did decommission, which is what I was alluding to, we're going to have a lot of people unemployed who have been employed during this system that we'll have put in place, and suddenly going to find themselves without a job if it is decommissioned, and that's perhaps a problem for tomorrow, but one we've got to bear in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, those questions and the answers. Our next questioner is Councillor Peel. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and welcome back, Chairman. Good to see you again. Councillor Cunningham said I'm not sure if other members of the committee share his concerns. Well, I presume Councillor Cunningham has been listening to me for the last few years, because I certainly do. This is GM. The GM authorities have got a job to do, so there's no criticism at all on officers or even members in going down this path, because we've been directed to do it. But the problem is, and without sounding like a stuck record, because I can almost say this off by heart now, the way that the government have handled this is it's nonsensical to me. The piecemeal approach, for a start, takes no account of other parts of the country that may well be heading up towards our pollution levels. Picking off particular parts of the country and everybody moving at different stages towards this direction to do something, which invariably for all of them has come down to charging. And Councillor Cunningham made an interesting point, didn't he, that what happens to all those that infrastructure, that bureaucracy that needs to be set up? Will all these people then lose their jobs? Well, probably not, because they'll probably then there'll probably be other clean air zones launched, for example, in South Lancashire or in anywhere nearby. If people can travel, they probably They'd probably keep the jobs. But the whole thing, to get to my main point, and I will conclude with a question, Chair, is it just doesn't make sense to me, because the government is providing some funds. We're still awaiting on the additional 100 million ask. They're providing some funds for retrofitting, for replacement of vehicles, so they accept that is a bona fide and sensible solution. But at the same time, are saying, but you must also introduce charging, in recognition of the fact that the funds that they're providing are not enough of an incentive to get all those, especially those small businesses, self-employed people. It's not enough to make it affordable for people to do that shift. So they know that the stick is also something that they want to do. But where it all falls apart is the fact of Leeds. And the only reason that Leeds has now pulled out of this, been allowed to pull out of this, is because they're in a really fortunate position of being a year or 2 years in front of us. And the Leeds case proves it beyond all reasonable doubt, that the government providing enough funds and different approaches taken by that city region has actually led to clean air without charging coming in. There, but for the grace of God, goes Greater Manchester. So just imagine if we'd have received the direction 12 or 18 months before, we could actually be in the same position of Leeds now. It is a matter of time. It's inevitable that all of these targets will be achieved at some stage. There's, just look at the government's separate agenda on phasing out polluting cars in the near future. This will all catch up, because the biggest crying shame out of it all is 36 million being invested in the infrastructure of charging. So that's cameras, it's the technology, it's signage, it's the administration of it for 2 years. For 2 years, so 2 years later, by 2024, everybody can have a big round of applause. We've hit our target, and all the infrastructure gets dismantled. I shared some concerns from Councillor Cunningham that maybe the infrastructure might stay there and be used for different purposes. It might be used by the police. I don't mind that, as long as people are upfront with it. I don't mind the police using camera technology, but what an absolute crying shame, and what an absolute waste of 36 million when it all just gets ripped out and people then, as we've said, lose their jobs. It defies belief, really, when that 36 million could actually be used to do what Leeds have done successfully, and put more and more, even more money into assisting people to replace the vehicles or retrofit. That's the point. So if I can table this in the form of a question, is it regarded in our clean air plan as it's 36 million for the sake of 2 years, maybe a little bit more. Is that regarded as justifiable to spend that level of money just for that short period of time, only for it all to be ripped out? Or would it not have been better had that 36 million not been spent on retrofitting and vehicle replacements? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
So in terms of the 36 million, that's the money that's been given to Greater Manchester to do the proprietary arrangements. So that is to undertake the procurement activity, to pay for the officer time, and obviously doing all of that activity. But in terms of the government, one of the things that the court ruling said when the government lost its cases and therefore it delegated down to local authorities was that cost shouldn't be any impediment to achieving this. It had to be the shortest possible time without the consideration of cost. So really that's the sort of the answer that I can give you in terms of that.
Just a very quick comeback, Chair. Just waiting for it to go live. I appreciate that answer, and that answer makes absolute sense. Cost should not have been an impediment, and that just further underlines my argument that 36 million plus, instead of being spent on proprietary arrangements and infrastructure, should have been targeted at helping small businesses, taxi drivers, etc. retrofit the vehicles. Can't really add any more to the point I've made, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Peel. Very good, well, interesting statement from you. And I'd ask members to try not to make the statements too long, and you know, get us as quickly to the question as possible. Thank you for that, Councillor Peel. Our next questioner is Councillor McKeon.
And my question really is very similar to, even the same as Councillor Peel. The experience of Leeds is fascinating, and I was wondering, I mean, do we have the levers within Greater Manchester to achieve what Leeds has achieved without going through the CAZ zones that we're planning?
So in terms, sorry, I don't know whether I need to wait for it to go live.
Yes, if you, John will put you on in a second now. There we are.
So Greater Manchester decision makers need to make a decision around the policies that it's going to have for its final clean air plan. So one of the things that in the summer they will be asked to do is to say, yes, this is the policy for the funding that we want to offer to businesses to help them upgrade to cleaner vehicles. Once that decision is made, that will then trigger the process to start allowing people to apply for the funding. But at the moment, we've just been through a consultation. We've set out what we think the eligibility criteria are. We've set out what we think the funding amount should be. And we've set out what the vehicle, you know, how many vehicles people can apply for to those various funds. We're now considering that through their responses. We're considering that through what it means in terms of COVID-19. We'll bring that forward to decision makers, and if decision makers say on the basis of everything they're happy with the funding amounts that have been put forward in the summertime, that would trigger the process to then getting the funding out of the door to people to help them upgrade, which, as I think you've outlined, has been one of the factors in Leeds not having to implement their clean air zone, because they have been giving out they were giving out funds from March of 2019 when they said that the zone was going to go live in January of 2020.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Our next question is Councillor Haslam.
Thank you very much. It is about the funding. You said that bus services can get up to buses can get up to £16,000 as long as they're operating on registered bus routes. What happens if the bus company takes £16,000 and then stops using that particular bus and transfers it to another part of the country? Is there any comeback on clawback of that money? And I suppose it happens. The thing will happen to other people who've achieved monies to improve their vehicles. Is there a possibility of clawback if they immediately take the money and then sell the vehicle on or use it outside the Greater Manchester? Thank you.
Yeah, so part of the funding agreement is for the retrofit that we're going through now, that the vehicle needs to be used in Greater Manchester for a period of time or for a certain number of miles. If for any reason the bus operator did move the vehicle on, and then there may be valid reasons for doing that, then it has to be replaced with the equivalent or cleaner vehicle to make sure that Greater Manchester was still keeping its fleet as clean as it possibly could be.
Time period are you talking about, or mileage are you talking about?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember the mileage. Obviously, that's something that we can confirm with you later on, but it's 5 years or the vehicle being a certain age. And again, we can confirm that to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brady, thank you.
Right, it's gone red. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, very interesting presentation. And I think for me, there's some clear parallels between Leeds and Manchester. They're both former heavily industrialised areas. So it's very interesting to see that Leeds now, by the measures they put in place, have managed to avoid this. Could you tell us a little bit more about what measures they put in place, and are our traffic patterns, I suppose I'm thinking the biggest polluters, are there similar types of vehicles, or, you know, is this, you say, like public transport, that there was like an investment in infrastructure? Is that not something that Greater Manchester could achieve, you know, achieve the same success by using that? Thank you.
Okay, I'm waiting to go red. Oh, so in terms of Leeds, I think the thing just to remind people is that Leeds were looking at quite a smaller city centre clean air zone, as opposed to Greater Manchester, which is looking at a zone that covers the whole of the region. But I think there are lessons. The lesson learnt, I think, has come through from the questions that have already been sort of asked and the comments that have been made. It's about making decisions about the amount of funding that you're going to offer to people, and getting that funding out to people so that they can help, you know, upgrade to cleaner vehicles. I think that's the thing that the sort of the lesson from them. And because they've done that, and because people knew that the clean air zone was coming as well, people have made those investment decisions to upgrade to cleaner vehicles. So if Greater Manchester makes a plan to introduce the zone, to give the funding amounts out to those people that they consider eligible for the funding, then it will, if it follows the Leeds profile, encourage people to upgrade and make those necessary improvements.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cox.
Thanks, Chair, and good to see you, Doug. Good to see you looking a bit better than you were a few weeks ago, notwithstanding the long COVID, and it's good to have you back.
Thank you.
I could repeat everything. I don't want to make him blush, but I could repeat everything Councillor Peel said earlier. I cannot understand this scheme at all. It just does not make any sense to me. It's been said before, but we've got the lowest or the best air we've had in 40 years. It's getting better and better every year. The vehicles we've got, the engines of the vehicles are improving all the time. We're going to put in an extremely expensive, high energy system costing near on £40 million, and then we're led to believe within a few months take it all out again. In the meantime, we are going to put enormous pressures on local, particularly local transport businesses. Keeps being described as an upgrade. What that means to a lot of small businesses, putting themselves in massive debt, because the amount that we're offering them to replace HGVs is a fraction of the cost. We're not helping them to upgrade. We're probably putting them out of business, and we're doing it with a smile on our face, saying we're doing it to help. I think, given what local businesses have been through over the last 12 months, to then impose this enormous cost on them for a scheme that we're claiming will be in place for a few months, I think is extremely irresponsible. And we keep being referred to as decision makers, and then being told in the same breath, well, it's got to be done. It's the law. It doesn't feel, we don't feel like decision makers. And I mean, I've been in the fortunate position of being able to say this directly to the minister's face. that we don't think this scheme is unacceptable. And as others have said, what has happened in Leeds makes far more sense. And I hope the leaders at Greater Manchester make this point clear to government. I think to impose this now, Chair, at this time, at enormous cost for a short period of time, with disastrous effects on many companies, is utterly irresponsible. And I think the sooner we look at ways of reducing clean air without imposing this enormously costly charging system, the better. And I'm sorry if there's not a great question at the end of this talk, and you've asked us to keep it short, and I appreciate that. But myself and I suspect Councillor Peel have heard this sort of presentation time and time again, and it never seems to make any more sense to us. So, you know, there will be pushback on this, and the pushback that you get from councillors will be nothing compared to what will happen if you try and impose this scheme on a lot of small businesses who are already on the brink of bankruptcy. So, you know, at some point, as local councillors, Chair, we've got to make our feelings felt. We're here to represent people and tell ministers that which I have done, and TFGM to some extent, that there's many people in this council, and I suspect in other councils, who are, shall we put it politely, highly sceptical that this is the right approach to take at this time. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just wait to go live. Thank you. Entirely agree with everything everybody is saying, and I just wonder whether or not we need to also remember that whilst this is a Greater Manchester scheme, this is the Bolton Council Scrutiny Committee, and perhaps we need to look a little bit more parochially. I think make the point that we would, as far as I can see, I think we would have achieved the limits anyway without this in Bolton around the time that we're going to achieve it anyway. I can't see why, again, we're having, if we're saying cost is no object to installing the infrastructure and the jobs to go with it, it does seem absolutely turning things on its head when we look at the amounts being offered per engine per vehicle and limited to 5 vehicles per company. As Councillor Peel rightly said, that money would have been better invested getting new vehicles on the road in the numbers that they were needed, and not limiting them either in the terms of the cost of the retrofit or you know, number of vehicles per operator. There's always the worry that this will, with mission creep, actually at the end of it, when the infrastructure I referred to earlier has to have something done with it, we might try and push this out to domestic vehicles, even though they're not included in this stage. I really don't understand why we're doing this, as has already been said. Charging vehicles that do pollute, of course, doesn't reduce the pollution. It just generates revenue. And I think ultimately the government would have been better spending the money, as I said, on engines, and probably taking more legal challenges to the court against the group of lawyers that actually took action against the government to make them bring these schemes in. I just wanted to make the point, parochially, I don't think Bolton, although we're going to pay high prices for this, unless the question would be, is there any opt-out for within the combined authority, an authority that isn't actually exceeding pollution levels? Would we be able to do anything along those lines? That would be the question after my little rant there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good question. As are all the questions, by the way. I don't want to favour Councillor Cunningham. Thank you.
Chair, it's Simon Warburton here from TFGM. In fairness to Megan, TFGM's role in this is as technical advisor. I think it would be appropriate for an officer of the council to be advising on the position of the council.
I don't mind if advisors, as long as somebody does it. Is a Bolton Scrutiny Committee.
So at that point, then, I think you know, Simon said we are you know, the technical advisors here, you know, providing you with the advice and and in the fact that we follow the rules that have been set by the government, and obviously the government are you know, following the rules that have been set by the court. In terms of talking about Bolton specifically, I think it's probably an idea to bring Nigel Bellamy in, who, as you said, you've heard before, is the technical director of Air Quality Consultants, who's been doing an awful lot of work on Greater Manchester's Clean Air Plan and the air quality modelling that sits behind the plan. I think he has prepared some information about Bolton and air quality that the committee might find interesting.
Thank you. And it is, as I said, a very good presentation. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Sam.
I think before we look at these other slides, we've still got one more member who wants to ask a question. Councillor Warren.
Thanks, Chair. Anybody who speaks to me about this, I can talk myself round in a full circle about the pros and cons about it. Obviously, when I became exec, I kind of attended my first meeting and kind of vented a lot of my frustrations at that. But one thing that I do find quite kind of infuriating really is that one of my first meetings as a councillor was a clean air briefing in the council chamber at Bolton. So this is 3 years ago. So when people make a comparison with Leeds, who kind of have got the funding out the door and made an impact sooner, I can kind of understand that frustration, because I too have that frustration. There is also a lot of frustration as well regarding the size. So if you could comment on the size of obviously GM's plan for everyone and the alternatives and the modelling, I think that would be quite kind of helpful. As I said, I can talk myself around in a full circle about this, and it is quite difficult because we have also had kind of notification from Client Earth that they are watching what we do as an individual borough. So even though this is a GM plan, we could turn around and say, okay, we're not going to do that, but then well, what will we do? Because we have to do something. And that's the problem really. And obviously the amount of work that has gone on regarding the modelling, regarding if because at one point we were looking at if we just told specific roads, etc. And then that pushing pollution into other areas which currently don't have a problem and things like that. It's a case of, well, what else do you do? So it is quite a thorny subject. I appreciate that, and it's not an easy one. If I'm honest, I don't think it's going to be easy on many people. But thanks, if you could just help with a couple of those, that'd be brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, so I think again it's probably something that maybe Nigel could cover when he talks about the air quality trends and exceedances in Greater Manchester. I suppose just to say that, you know, we're talking about the plan here in terms of, you know, where we are up to in development of the plan. There's been an awful lot of work done, as Councillor Warren's just said, in terms of getting to this stage. There is an awful lot of technical work that really is available, and your officers could take you through in some more detail with regarding the size of the Greater Manchester zone and why it is needed at a regional level.
Thank you for that. So I think what might be a good idea now is if we move on to the next set of slides, and excuse me, and we can talk through those. And if anyone else, if we've got any more questions, then please, you know, feel free to indicate in the chat. Thank you.
Nigel, does it start at oh, there we are. Yeah, it's fine. Thank you.
Hi, I'll just wait for it to go live as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's the presentation's live now. Yes.
Yeah. Am I?
You are, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Hi everyone. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. I have just prepared a couple of slides to cover a couple of different topics which we thought might come up. the two things we have looked at were around trends in air quality around COVID, which is the slide just here, but I might just move on to the next slide first, if that's okay, which is around air quality in Bolton and exceedances and the kind of areas we're expecting to see issues and the kind of scheme that we've tried to develop fundamentally. I think it's reasonable, some of the comments have been to say that Bolton has, we're expecting to see compliance in Bolton earlier than some of the other districts in Greater Manchester. I might just comment on the issues with Leeds slightly later too, if that helps. But if I've put up a plan here, and I don't know how well it's showing up on the size of the screen that's available. But what we see here is our expectation of the areas that were due to be in exceedance in 2021, and we had to project forward at the start of this project, obviously that's several years ago, to the likely potential opening years that we could go through in terms of how the scheme would develop. So here we see the issues, and I'm sure you've seen these before, in terms of the likely routes. When Greater Manchester was required to bring forward a plan that covered a variety of different roads across Greater Manchester. The A666 St Peter's Way was one of those roads, but there were a variety of these kind of roads that are strategic links. They aren't urban city centres, which is the kind of problems we see in some of the other cities across England. So we were tackling a variety of different problems. Those look at the type of strategic traffic using long range routes, as well as urban centre links, which are obviously delivering traffic into specific locations. And the way that vehicles move and use the road network is quite different in those areas, and also it covers different types of vehicles. And that's kind of where we had the issues about developing a scheme that worked for the whole of Greater Manchester. In Bolton's case, obviously this is the modelling that I'm sure you've seen before. And basically we had exceedances predicted on the A666 St Peter's Way, and actually in fact on the A666 Bolton Road too, further down closer to the motorway network. And then on those roads accessing Bolton town centre. If you could just move on a slide, please. So when we developed that initial modelling, we then put out further monitoring data based on those initial sites that are flagged red on that network there, where we were expected to see exceedances, and we have picked up those exceedances, and this is monitoring that has recently become available and published. But that shows that the exceedances agree well with our modelling, which is reassuring. But actually the concentrations are potentially higher than we may have expected, and there are reasons for that. Now, this is the 2019 data that's put up here. Obviously, we haven't picked up data that reflects 2020 yet. It's not fully available. I will discuss that. I can potentially discuss that in a little bit of detail. But this shows that there are exceedances. They are in the areas we'd expect. No model is perfect. And we have to represent that. We'll recognise that. We're looking at a very large transport model that's developed, that's providing traffic information about different types of vehicles and the movements they make on different roads. And then we'd have to take that through an emissions and an air quality model. So we predict locations where we expect exceedances to occur, and we've gone out and put monitoring there, and that's kind of shown that we are expecting to see exceedances in those locations. Now, this is 2021. As was stated, I think in one of the comments, we are expecting to see air quality improve over time, and for these links to gradually become compliant naturally. And that's as a result of vehicles and the expected upgrade in vehicles to newer Euro 6 variants. Now, Euro 6 vehicles are much cleaner than their predecessors. The variety or the improvement from a Euro 4 or Euro 5 to a Euro 6 does vary quite substantially by vehicle type. Heavier vehicles have a bigger improvement. They started from a higher point and they reduced down to lower levels, and that's in part due to the technology that's available in the bigger vehicles, which can carry more abatement equipment in them cost effectively. But that's that natural cycle that we're trying to drive as part of a clean air zone. So we're looking for vehicles to upgrade over time and following that natural cycle, but bring that forward. And that's what the shortest possible time is aiming to do. And the clean air plan has had to calculate, based on the monitoring data we've got available, what the emissions need to be on those roads to get to the point where concentrations have reduced sufficiently. And that's quite complicated because we have a variety of different vehicles doing different things using different fuels. But fundamentally, when we come to the issues we see around Leeds versus Manchester and other cities, because there are a range of other cities obviously bringing their proposals forward at the moment. We have quite different issues. And Leeds, I don't know how widely reported it is, the concentrations that were present in Leeds are quite a lot lower than those that are in Manchester. The reason that Leeds was brought forward ahead of some of the other cities was perhaps due to issues in the national modelling, increasing the ranking, as it were. And it does in fact have lower levels in the first place, so it didn't need the same level of upgrade that other cities need, and that's a separate issue completely. And again, from that lower level required, the benefit they've had of people taking measures to upgrade, and then obviously the development funds has led to those improvements. And there are some anomalies in roadworks and so on that don't make Leeds a perfect comparison with Greater Manchester, unfortunately. But nevertheless, concentrations have been seen to decrease there. If we just move one slide on, I've just made a couple more comments. So the effects of COVID is something that we're having to think about right now. We are expecting to see these concentrations reduce over time, naturally. And in terms of the locations of exceedance, we would expect some of these to decrease over time. But one of the impacts that we have with COVID is that actually there have been reduced vehicle sales in 2020 and 2021 as companies have are less able to afford the upgrade or waiting for better certainty about how they should proceed in the future. And that has led to a measurable and clear reduction in vehicle sales. It varies by vehicle type. So heavy goods vehicles have tended not to change their investment cycle, and there are reasons, strategic reasons for that. Some of that is because they brought forward their investment to 2019 for regulatory reasons. When we come to private cars and vans, however, and taxis, we also see that there are clear reductions in vehicle sales that won't be caught up. What that means is that as our projection rate into the future is actually slowed down, so it's effectively the opposite of a clean air zone being in place. The natural rate of vehicle replenishment on the network has been slowed as a consequence of COVID, and the government have required us to take that into account. And that is something we are thinking about right now. On the other side, we have the changes from potential working from home patterns, which might reduce some of the commute trips in terms of that private cars make on some of these roads. We have done some sensitivity testing, and professional judgment would support this anyway, which shows that the impact of vehicle sales would outweigh the effect of reduced commute patterns. So we are following the guidance as the government has set it out and are reviewing that, and we'll bring those different conclusions through as part of wrapping up a finalised set of modelling following any conclusions from the feedback from the consultation. But what that would indicate is some of those trajectories that we saw in terms of the improvement on the road network across Greater Manchester and including Bolton won't quite have reached the state that we were expecting in 2023, basically because of this delay in the upgrade of specific vehicles, especially vans and particularly private cars. The other slide, should I take questions? If there's any questions on that specifically, I can cover that. Should I cover those now?
No, I think if you continue with the slides, we can take the questions at the end.
Okay, so if we go, if I take, this is the last slide on this section around Bolton. I can go back to the air quality trends in Bolton if that helps. Just go back one further. Okay, so we have been asked some questions about trends in Bolton, and particularly the COVID trends in air quality monitoring. It is not a simple question to answer, unfortunately, as all things air quality tend to be. And the reason for that is trends in nitrogen dioxide are quite difficult to predict, particularly in across shorter time periods. Nitrogen dioxide exhibits a really strong seasonal trend over the year, so we have higher concentrations in the winter and lower in the summer. And I've tried to just pull out the difference in trend during the COVID period from the previous couple of years, and this is specifically from monitoring in Bolton. So the blue line shows concentrations from 2018 and 2019. And we see that effect from the winter to the summer, where we have a couple of competing factors. So we have the effect of higher wind speeds, and also we have the effect of stronger sunlight. And nitrogen dioxide is broken down by sunlight effectively. So the stronger sun and more hours of sunlight in the summer break nitrogen dioxide down, and we obviously, and therefore that means we get lower concentrations over the summer than we do in the winter. If we just look at the grey transport bars, these represent effectively transport demand on the network. So these are the road traffic flows, and this is the pattern that we see across Greater Manchester over the last year. So in January and February, those are the typical pre-COVID levels. As we move into the back end of March and then into April and May, we're seeing the traffic demand on the road network, and specifically the roads as opposed to general transport, significantly reduced as the partial or the part of the month in March, and then the full month of April when the biggest response in transport was witnessed. And then there's a gradual recovery up as there were various relaxations which obviously varied across the country and across Greater Manchester in different ways, until approximately October when the second national lockdown kicked in. So if you now look at the red line, this shows the difference in measured nitrogen dioxide at locations across Bolton, and we see quite a strong response. In February and March, levels are very similar to those that we'd seen in 2018 and 2019, and you do get substantial variation from day to day. Obviously, the biggest influence on measured concentrations is wind speed and wind direction, but most particularly wind direction. And obviously, over the course of an average day and an average month, the effect of vehicle emissions would then come through. But on a particular day, as the wind direction changes from one area to another, or from one direction across the road, or the opposite way, then you see that influence picked up in a monitor very strongly. So we do see variance from day to day, and which is why that blue line is probably not completely smooth U shape. But immediately, as those trends kick in, that effect of reduced emissions from the road network as road traffic was significantly reduced by sort of up to 50%. Shows that it shows its way through into the nitrogen dioxide concentrations, and those then recover through the summer as transport itself recovers. There are some factors in here that we haven't been able to bring out, which I pulled out in different metrics around the type of vehicles on the road. So freight and commercial vehicles were more resilient through lockdown as compared to private cars. However, obviously private cars form the majority of traffic flows on most of the road network, albeit their proportion of emissions is slightly lower. So here we're seeing that we see a recovery up towards October. We've got freight levels have recovered quite quickly, and passenger car levels are recovering slightly more slowly, although you can't see that picked out through those grey bands. And by the end of 2020, the trends in NO2 have almost recovered to the point that they are matching pre-COVID levels, albeit with that reduction in total traffic on the road. We do actually have potentially higher movements of vans and probably about typical levels of heavy goods vehicles and buses on the network. So although the road traffic levels are very close to 100% in terms of their trend, the actual emissions are close to 100%. Sorry, road traffic levels are a little bit low. Emissions from the most important vehicle types are actually up to typical levels, and that's borne its way through into the NO2 trends, where we're seeing those quite close to 2020. So that recovery has occurred as we might expect. Those are the two things I prepared information on. So if there are any comments on that, I'm happy to take those now.
Thank you very much for that, Nigel. We've got a question from Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Nigel. Again, very informative. Just going further back in the slides you've been showing us, you did mention there about forms of transport, journeys that people are using or making that they may make now, as opposed to what they would have done pre-COVID. One of the things I think is worth pointing out, and TFGM may want to take notice of this, is that there seems to have been a reduction in tram travel. When we talk about commuting, and I'll give you direct examples, and these can be used to look at. If you wanted to travel from Whitefield station, the tram station, and go up to Old Trafford, either the cricket ground or the UA 92 Academy or whatever it is you're going up there, there used to be a through tram that you could get there. And since the COVID has, or since post-COVID now, she was there, that service has been removed, and it was always a very, very full service. There's also one other further anomaly that's kicked in here, and that is that people that might want to travel to the tram station on a bike, for instance, and then get off the bike, get on the tram and travel into Manchester from can no longer do that unless they have a specific type of folding bike. You're refused entry onto those trams now unless you've got a specific folding bike. So that actually reduces the number of people who have the option to go green, if you will, and cycle to the tram station and then get onto the tram. How's this supposed to be helping the situation? It's not, is it? Perhaps you may know something about this, or I may just want to refer it on to TFGM. But it's certainly a problem that needs to be addressed now that we're hoping to go back to some kind of normality and passenger numbers are going to rise again. Thank you.
Just to explain those points, Councillor Clunigan, because you're absolutely right. At present, we're operating an emergency network on the Metrolink system. The rationale for the network that we're operating at present is to ensure that we can provide double units on all services across the system. The reason why we want to be able to provide double units is so that we can best help to manage social distancing. So we're still operating on a statutory requirement for 1 metre plus social distancing, which in practice means that we can only accommodate 21 people per single unit on the system, which of course has transformed the level of capacity that we're able to provide. But you're absolutely right. As soon as we are able to get the green light from government that we are able to step back from the constraints of social distancing, we absolutely want to reintroduce the timetable that we operated previously, because it's a very constrained service that we're having to provide, and it does introduce all of those levels of inconvenience, and it is a real cause for concern for us as we start to plan for the next few stages, because clearly the demand will start to represent itself quite quickly. With regard to the carriage of folding cycles, that's a policy that's been in place for nearly 20 years actually now across the Metrolink system. It was informed by a piece of work which identified two shortcomings in particular to being able to accommodate cycles on trams. The first issue is in normal times, beyond the 12 months that we've experienced recently, the importance of being able to safeguard the space for the maximum number of passengers, and there are a range of movement hazards, cleanliness issues, and so forth that come in terms of managing that issue. The second issue is safe storage of cycles on trams. So our colleagues operating rail services do of course provide spaces for cycles on trains, but there are appropriate straps that are also in place. Generally they're carried within a particular section of trains. That isn't something that is readily replicated on what are very, very small vehicles that we have to operate on the Metrolink system because of the capacity issues that we have within the city centre. And so what we've looked to focus on is making sure that we are providing cycle storage at Metrolink stops, and in the coming year we are looking to start to roll out a cycle hire scheme initially around the regional centre, so that we can at least help to provide an onward leg at the far side. It's not as convenient as taking your own bike,
yeah,
but it's the best that we can put in place with the restrictions that we've got on what are actually really small vehicles, and a real capacity issue that we have around the Metrolink system.
Thanks, Simon. I mean, that's very enterprising, renting somebody a bike who's already left it at the other end. You've got me there. Perhaps I could ask that in terms of advertising the changes, when hopefully you do restore your full service, something's done around that, because I was going to come at it the other way and say that although you were still advertising the service, you got on the tram and then we found out you had to get off because it was going the wrong way. There was no notification that was going to happen, so I think a trick was missed there in the comms, basically. Yeah, anything you can do, great.
Thank you, and I'll certainly feed that back, because we are aware that we continue to hopefully improve our communications all the time, but these are difficult times to get all of the communications right. But looking to reopening, we are doing an awful lot of work with destinations right across Greater Manchester to make sure that as we open up, we don't only use ourselves as a communication channel, but important entities like the County Cricket Club, for example, can also communicate really clearly to visitors how we're opening up and how they can use the system.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Simon. Cheers.
Okay, there's no more questions, but I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to contradict what I said about making statements, but I'll keep it brief. There's a lot of strategies that can be used to reduce pollution in the air, and I think it's fair to say that if you ask most people, they will support the idea that we need cleaner air, and one of the ways that to do it is through traffic management or sorting out the traffic, because a lot of us drive cars, we can't all afford brand spanking new ones. And all the information that's been presented here has been fantastic, and it will help to feed in to the decision-making process. One thing I'm concerned about is we appear to be being railroaded by these decision makers down a particular path, and I know that's because of the government. Once you start introducing a charge for whatever reason, it becomes deemed as a punishment. So if you can't afford the newest car that's eco-friendly and doesn't pollute, you start to resent having to do things, having to go into Manchester or whatever. You see it as a punishment, and I'm not fond of schemes that punish people. Now, I know it's not a punishment, okay, and that's not the idea behind it, but that's how it will be perceived by many people. And I'd rather have schemes that will encourage people to want to change without the punishment part. So trading schemes for people, your car's coming to the end of its life and you could get a grant or whatever to encourage you to buy a more environmentally friendly vehicle. Or the best way, and probably the easiest way for most people, is to force manufacturers to actually produce more environmental vehicles. And I know the government is doing this, but they're giving them way too much time. So my question is this: what can we as a council and the Greater Manchester Combined Authority and Transport for Greater Manchester, what can we do to encourage the government and say, look, what you're proposing is all well and good, but it's not the right thing, and we need alternatives, obviously. Say this is the right route. I'm not qualified to be able to give those alternatives. I've got ideas, but I'm not qualified. You guys are qualified for this. You study you've got all the results, you've got the information, you've got the data. There's got to be something better than a charging scheme for the whole of Greater Manchester. It's a huge area, and I honestly think, and I've said it, it will be perceived as a punishment rather than an incentive to upgrade. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay.
By the way, I forgot to say, I don't expect an answer now. This is just something for you guys to think about. It's for our council officers to think about, the people, members in Greater Manchester, officers in Greater Manchester, Transport for Greater Manchester. It's something to think about, because I get the feeling it's not going to be a popular scheme for many reasons. So don't worry about answering now.
But I was going to say, I can give you an answer.
Oh, excellent, thank you.
So I think the thing to say is, the first thing is that the scheme that has been consulted on doesn't include cars. Yeah, and in terms of what options are there out there for Greater Manchester, as I referenced before, there's an awful lot of work that's gone on to get us to this point, and there's an awful lot of work that looked at a whole list of options that Greater Manchester could do to deal with its nitrogen dioxide problem, and it's followed the government guidance that's been set out to do that, and the government has overseen the process that we've done, and it's looked at all the modelling we've done, it's looked at all the analysis, and we came to the conclusion that the best performing option for Greater Manchester was the introduction of a Greater Manchester wide GM clean air zone, and that's what's been submitted through the outline business case, which the government have then reiterated through the ministerial direction, which asks the authorities to take action to deal with the problem by 2024 at the latest through the introduction of that zone. So, that's where we've got to through all the work that's been done.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I understand. I'm quite happy for a clean air zone. What I'm not happy about is being charged to enter that clean air zone, and I could equate it to a nuclear free zone, which there are many around the country. It doesn't really, you won't get charged, not that I have a nuclear device, but if the government decides to transport some nuclear devices or parts of them through a nuclear free zone, they're not going to get charged for it. It's a statement of intent. What we need to do is, and I'm sorry if this is not directed at you guys, but we need to encourage people rather than punish them. That's my point on this. And I know you can argue that if they upgrade or whatever, they're not being punished. It's an incentive scheme to get people to change. But you don't have to charge people to incentivize them to change. I just think it's completely the wrong thing for Bolton. That's who I can only speak for. But I also think it's wrong for Greater Manchester, and it sets the wrong agenda from basically. And I know the government says it, and it's coming from the government. They've set what they want to, and they want a clean air zone. Well, that's fine. Let's give them a clean air zone, but we can do it a different way. I'll finish there. Thank you very much. John Tyson, you'd like to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Really, mine is just a concluding comment, and I think it's really just to recognise what an important issue that this is really for both elected members and officers. I think what's been apparent to me tonight, and I'm relatively new to this agenda. It's my first experience of a briefing of this nature with colleagues from TFGM, but it's quite clear to me that members from all parties are incredibly passionate about this. As I say, it's an incredibly sensitive issue, particularly as we emerge from a global pandemic. I think equally, given the ministerial direction, it's also an incredibly challenging issue for officers and for all districts across Greater Manchester. I'm mindful that we had the benefit of the report coming to Cabinet. I think it was on the 15th of March. It subsequently went into full council, but I think tonight's session has really given members the opportunity to sort of get beneath the skin of the report, if that's the right word, and to reflect obviously views, concerns, opinions. So in that regard, I think it's been a very helpful session. Really, my parting comments, and forgive me, Chair, if I steal your thunder, but just from the officer side, I just wanted to thank Megan, Simon, and Nigel for their contribution tonight. I think all members on the meeting tonight have acknowledged the informative and comprehensive nature of the presentation material. So, as I say, thank you to colleagues from the officer side, and I'll hand back to yourself, Chair.
Thank you very much. And yes, you have stolen my thunder, but I'm going to do it anyway. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was, I have to be careful what I say now. It captured my attention. Let's put it that way. Not that the others don't, but I don't want to get the impression that I'm bored with other presentations. I'm not with this. The way it was presented, the information, all fantastic. So thanks, Simon, Megan, and Nigel, for your presentation, for answering the somewhat difficult questions at times. Thank you very much, and thank you, members, for your questions and for your attention. I hope everyone has a great evening when we finish. And yes, I'd just like to reiterate what Councillor Peel's put in the chat. No criticism whatsoever on TFGM officers. We know a lot of the things we say can be quite emotive, but it's never directed at you guys. Okay, we've got to make the point, and hopefully someone somewhere will hear these points and may do something about it. But thanks very much for coming. It's been a pleasure chairing tonight. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Could you end the live, please, John?
Thanks, Chair. Bye.